What makes an effective leader? You might think that you have the answer, but in this video, I'm going to go through the science of what makes an effective leader. I'm going to give you 5 skills that are essential for leadership, and then I'm going to give you some tools from therapy that I routinely use with my clients in my psychotherapy practice. And I can assure you that the skill of leadership is one that you want to invest in. I mean, just think about your own life. Is there an area in your life where you aren't trying to lead people into a positive direction, whether it be with your romantic relationships, your family, your business, your community, your work, your service? Just think about all those aspects of your life. Is there any domain at any of those levels that you're not trying to positively influence people in a positive direction, or where you're trying to lead by example, or you're trying to help the group cause in some way? John C. Maxwell put it well. He said that a leader is someone who knows the way, goes the way, and shows the way. So I'd like you to think about your life and the domains and the levels and the relationships and the context in which you're being called to be a better leader, in which you're being called to know better, to go better, and to show better. And I'm asking you to think about that because, as we've already stated, leadership is going to be important to all of those domains. And in those domains, you're either an effective leader or you're not. You're either helping steer people in a positive direction or you're not. You're either impactful in your leading or you're not. So how exactly do you answer this question of what makes a good leader? I want to start by saying what I think you shouldn't do. And this is actually going to go against the grain a bit here, because I don't think you should be listening to successful leaders tell you about what leadership skills are important. And the reason I say this is because the people who are already successful in some domain of life as leaders, these people don't necessarily know what the most important skills are for you to develop. They know what worked for them, but what worked for them was in a specific context, at a specific time in history, with specific challenges and specific goals, and it worked within a specific industry or specific area of life, and it worked with a specific following. It worked with a specific kind of follower. So this person who's speaking on stage about the kind of leadership skill that you need to develop doesn't necessarily know what your context is. And as I stated now, there are so many contextual features that are relevant to what leadership skill you should develop. So I think what you should turn to is the science of leadership, because the people who actually study the science of what leadership skills are important to be an effective leader, those people are actually in touch with what works in general across contexts, across time periods, and with different kinds of followers. They're not speaking from this personal perspective that can be heavily biased and that might not point you to the truth of what sort of leadership skills are universally good and effective. If you want to know that, you have to trust the science. And so in this video, that's what we're going to do. We're going to speak about 5 leadership skills that have been shown through scientific research to help you be a more effective leader. And let's start with leadership skill 1, which is self-reflection. Now, self-reflection is your ability to be aware of your moment-to-moment thoughts and feelings and behaviors. It's your ability to monitor that. Lao Tzu put it this way. He said that the person who knows others is wise, but the person who knows himself is enlightened. I think that self-reflection is part of this enlightenment process, because whatever you do, however you respond to life, has to start with the foundation of first knowing what's going on for you, because that's the space out of which you're behaving, and thus that's the space out of which you're being a leader. So a foundational skill is to be aware of what that leader is going through, internally and externally. And don't just take my word for it. A research article published by Professor Amanda M. Sinclair in 2007 showed that when people are more self-reflective, they find that they can be better leaders because they're more adaptable. Because when you're aware of your moment-to-moment thoughts and emotions and behaviors, you're better able to adjust your strategy. You don't get fixated on your own biases. You don't make decisions based from those own biases and things that you're not aware of that are going on for you. Instead, you're able to better respond to the context because you know what you're working with in terms of your internal context. So let's talk about some tools from therapy to help you develop the skill of self-reflection. The ability to develop self-reflection has been something that therapists have had to work with for a long time. It was already early in the 20th century where Sigmund Freud, probably one of the most famous psychologists, used a technique called free association, where he'd have a client lie down on a couch and he'd have them speak about what's going through their mind moment to moment freely. That's why it's called free association. It's about how his thoughts and emotions, urges, impulses are relating to each other. And having the client speak that out loud was really helpful for the therapist because it helps them see that mental process. In other words, it develops their self-reflection abilities. Nowadays, there are other kinds of therapies that also advocate for this awareness and this detachment from your internal process. Things like mindfulness meditation help you do that. Things like cognitive diffusion from acceptance and commitment therapy also helps you do that. There are many forms of this that have sprouted up. But what you can do in a simplistic way is to practice observing the difference between paying attention to your external experience versus your internal experience. So what you can try is notice something in the external world. Pay attention to it and notice what sounds, for example, you're hearing in this moment. If you pay attention, you might notice something inside the room, outside the room. And now that you're paying attention to that, I want you to move your attention to your internal world. So now notice your emotional state in this moment, your overall mood. How do you feel? Do you feel pleasant or unpleasant? Do you feel high energy or low energy? Just take stock of that feeling internally and just notice what that feels like. And then move back to the external world. But this time, don't pay attention to a sound, pay attention to a sight. Notice a color in the room and then notice what the quality of that color is like. What does that color feel like? Now, what I've had you do is notice that your attention can move between the internal and the external world. Your attention can actually move between these two spaces, and the better able you are to be aware of that, the better able you'll be to pay attention to what's going on for you internally, moment to moment. So I'd like you to now pay attention to the flow of your internal world. So this includes thoughts, memories, images, little bits of words that pop up in your mind, urges, impulses. This all forms part of your internal world. So practice noticing that. If I had to, for example, say out loud what I'm experiencing right now, I would say, I'm thinking about how to deliver my next sentence, and I'm wondering if that sentence is going to be relevant to the video. And there's a bit of vulnerability that's coming up right now, a feeling of vulnerability, because I'm telling people what my internal world feels like. And then that vulnerability is making me have the urge to shut down a bit. And when I said vulnerability, it made me think of this book by Brene Brown on vulnerability. And now I'm wondering how long I should keep speaking. So that thought has popped into my mind. How long should I keep speaking? So if I end it there, that's an example of how you free associate. It's an example of how you observe that flow of internal experience, thoughts, emotions, feelings, memories, urges, impulses, words, images, and you be with that. The more that you practice that, the better able you'll be to self-reflect. The second skill you want to develop is emotion regulation. This is the ability to manage and respond to emotional experiences in a healthy way and in a way that's aligned with your goals. Aristotle put it this way. He said that anyone can get angry. That is easy. But what's difficult is being angry toward the right person, in the right context, to the right degree, for the right purpose, and in the right way. That is hard. And I think it's a good quote to touch on the nuances of what it means to emotionally regulate yourself. It doesn't mean to switch off your emotions. Like Aristotle says, it means to use your emotions in the right way, in the right manner, to the right degree, directed toward the right circumstances. And it's important for leaders to have this skill for two reasons. Firstly, Being able to regulate your emotions will mean that you're better able to make informed decisions. You're not making decisions based on impulse or fear or anxiety or lack of self-worth, but you're actually making decisions based on reason, based on what's good for the long term, based on what's good for your goals. And the second reason is that as a leader, you might have to navigate people, you might have to navigate your followers through difficult situations, stressful situations, situations that bring up difficult emotions. And so if you're doing that, then you need to be able to regulate your own emotions in those moments in order to show up effectively as a leader. And this was shown through an article published by Grandy and Gabriel in the Journal of Management. And what they found was that leaders who can effectively regulate their emotions create more productive work environments. So in terms of some tools from therapy to help you develop this skill, there are two classes of tools that you need to use here. One class of tools is about preventing being emotionally vulnerable, and the other class of tools is about in the moment, how to survive a crisis, an emotional crisis. So when it comes to the first class of tools, it's your general things like the amount of sleep that you got the previous night. It is the level of nutrition in your diet and the lack of sugary and ultra-processed foods. It's things like the amount of exercise and movement that you get, the amount of social connection that you have, your ability to manage the stresses in your life. So those are all factors that we know are generally good for our well-being, but they're also good in terms of making us less emotionally vulnerable. It's like if you imagine that you have an emotional immune system, they make you less vulnerable to pathogenic emotions. And then when it comes to the second class of emotions, you want to know how to down-regulate a very intense emotion in the moment. Because sometimes even if you do all the preventative work, you might still have a very hectic emotion that you have to deal with. And so you have to know how to deal with that in the moment. And a really simple tool from therapy that we use is deep breathing. All you have to do is just extend your out breath. So take a deep in breath and then extend your out breath. And what I mean by extend is you slowly release the air. And you make the out breath a lot longer than the in breath. This is very helpful because it puts you into rest and digest rather than fight or flight. When you're in fight or flight, you're stressed and emotionally overwhelmed. When you're in rest and digest, that's a state that your body is in before you sleep, or when you're relaxed, or when you're eating. And that's a state you want to be in to counteract any sort of negative, extreme overwhelm. The third skill is a bit of an obvious one, but don't take it for granted that it's happening. And that's the skill of communication. Communication is all about effectively conveying information and receiving information in an accurate way. And the reason I even bothered including this is because people are not as good at communication as they think they are. And I know this as a psychotherapist because it's my job to speak and to listen, and to do that in a very deep way, a very meaningful way, and a very accurate way. So don't take it for granted that you're communicating effectively. George Bernard Shaw said it this way. He said that the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it's taken place. So in other words, it's the illusion that you communicated effectively. A lot of the times, problems in our lives and problems in leadership can be solved simply by just saying a bit more, or saying something a bit more accurately, or communicating a bit more feeling, or being willing to listen a bit more deeply. So if we think about tools from therapy to help with this, the most obvious place to look is couples therapy. Because as someone who does couples counseling and helps couples meet each other, something that's extremely fundamental in that form of therapy is communication. Because couples therapy is always between at least two people. So there's always two people, and we need to bridge that gap between them through communication. And so some suggestions that we give is to listen, not to listen to reply. Listening to listen is very different from listening to reply. Most of the time when we're listening to people, and this goes outside of leadership, it's even with our family and our friends and strangers, when we say that we're listening, we're actually listening to the first quarter of the sentence, and then we're already deciding what we're going to say in response. We're not really listening to understand, to empathize, to be curious, to ask more questions. So something that can be really helpful here is to put on that hat, a hat of curiosity. And a very practical way to do that is to leave a gap between what the person says and how you respond. just a little bit of time to take a breather, just to nod, just to breathe in, to allow yourself to process what was just said fully, and then to respond. It's a very simple communication trick, but it's very effective in just creating a bit of that pause so that you're not impulsively just responding to what someone else is saying, but instead you're trying to listen deeply. You're trying to be curious about what's being said. Another very useful technique we use in therapy is we often check in with our clients about whether we've heard them correctly, and we do that by mirroring what they're saying. So if they say something like, I feel very frustrated about the fact that I can't use my legs properly because of my muscular condition, then we might check in and say, just to clarify, what I'm hearing you say, and I want to make sure I get you right here, is that you're feeling very frustrated about the muscular condition, specifically with your ability to walk. Have I got you? Have I got that right? So you see, just a simple check-in process can make the communication more effective because it doesn't leave any room for misunderstanding. The fourth skill that you want to develop is assertiveness. Assertiveness is your ability to stand up for your rights and your feelings and to express that while also respecting the rights and feelings of others. Brené Brown says that clear is kind, unclear is unkind. And so a lot of assertiveness is about just being clear about what you feel, what you think, being brave enough to say it, and being brave enough to put up boundaries when needed. And the relevance here for leaders is extremely important. Leaders oftentimes have to advocate for their group, for their followers. They have to be very steadfast in the way that they communicate and in the way that they behave and in the way that they interact with other groups and other leaders. And in an article published by Ames and Flynn in Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin, they found that leaders who were more assertive were more likely to effectively help their followers move through periods of transition, and they were also more likely to make effective decisions for their group. So this is a very important skill to develop for leaders. It's not just for them, it's for their group. So in psychotherapy, how we help people be more assertive is by helping them note times when they're passive and to note times when they're aggressive, because assertiveness is between those two. Assertiveness is not being passive and letting other people run all over you. It's not being aggressive either and you running over people. It's a middle ground where you're respectful of your needs and your feelings and respectful of the needs and feelings of someone else, but you're still setting a boundary and you're still doing what you need to do. And in therapy, we often role play boundary setting and assertiveness and assertive communication. And so I'll ask a client to try to be more assertive, to put on that hat of assertiveness and try it out, just so that they get used to it in a safe space. And then I give them some tips on how they can adjust it, how they can adapt it. And there's this sort of feedback process to help them learn how to embody a bit more assertiveness. But you can do this for yourself as well. You could do this in a mirror, or even better yet, you could film yourself. Because if you film yourself, you'll be able to directly assess yourself as a third-party observer and then try to tweak some things. If you look at your phone and you notice, I actually wasn't speaking very loud here, you could do that. Or you notice I wasn't standing up straight, you could do that. Or you might notice you weren't decisive with your words, or you kept saying or using filler words. You can adjust all of that if you film yourself, and then you'll be able to replicate the process that goes on during psychotherapy. And the fifth skill that you want to develop is resilience. Resilience is your ability to adapt well to difficult or challenging life circumstances. It's, in other words, your ability to bounce back from something that's difficult. Robert Jordan in The Wheel of Time describes it as the difference between an oak tree that breaks because of intense weather and a willow tree that bends with the wind. He says that resilience is your ability to bend without breaking, just like the willow tree. It's not being the oak tree that is broken by the circumstance, but rather learning how to flow with that challenging or difficult time and still be standing afterwards. And the importance for a leader here is obvious. You have to be resilient. Being a leader is not an easy job. Being a leader is oftentimes difficult. It's oftentimes challenging. Being purpose-driven doesn't necessarily lead to a comfortable life, but it leads to a meaningful life. And in that pursuit of meaning, in the pursuit of doing something spectacular or great, you're oftentimes going to be challenged, and you need some resilience to be able to deal with those setbacks. Now, in terms of tools from therapy to help you build your resilience, to help you develop the skill, there are many, because people who come to psychotherapy have been through really difficult and challenging life circumstances. That's oftentimes why people come to therapy, because of what's happened in their lives, what's happened in their past, in their childhood, what's currently happened to them. And so these people often need tools from therapy to help them develop their resilience. And a really helpful tool is something called cognitive reappraisal. So cognitive is a fancy German word for thinking, and to reappraise something means to think about it differently. So cognitive reappraisal is the process of viewing an event differently. As the ancient philosopher Epictetus said, life is not about what happens to us, but about how we perceive what happens to us. And this model, this cognitive reappraisal model, assumes that you can actually change your emotional and behavioral reaction to an event if you change your thinking about the event. For example, if you're let go from a job, you might have the thought to losing your job that, oh, this means I'm unworthy. But once you notice that, you get to reappraise that thought. You get to think about it differently. You could say something, instead of, I'm unworthy because I lost this job, it could mean something like, this job wasn't the right fit for me. That's more of a resilient cognitive reappraisal, because it allows you to keep moving forward, to apply for other jobs, to withstand the pressure of that moment. Another example is if you fail a test. You could have the thought, I failed this test, therefore I'm stupid. But that's in need of some cognitive reappraisal, because that thought won't help you. It won't help you be resilient. So a more resilient thought to put in place of that is something like, failing is feedback. Failing is feedback and information that I could use to improve. That's more of a growth mindset and therefore will lead to more resilience. Now, one final important thing here about all these 5 skills. These 5 skills are based on the idea that leaders have certain positive skills that are within themselves. But new research into the field of leadership is showing us that leadership is not just about some individualistic traits, but rather about the collectivistic process that goes on. In other words, what makes a good leader or not is not about what they bring to the table. It's about how what they bring to the table interacts with what their followers need. So it might be the case that in order to be an effective leader, you're not just going to need to develop these skills, but you're going to also need to learn how to interact with a group of followers. You're going to need to develop some interpersonal skills. And that's why I want to advise you to click on the link in the description below. I have a free video training there. If you want to take this even a step further, I have a free video training on how you can be a more effective leader by also developing the interpersonal skills. If you watch that video along with this one, then I think you'll be equipped in both ways. And I think that'll give you the best chance of being an effective leader. So I'll see you there.